But first and foremost, to get us started tonight, I'm delighted to welcome the Minister for Sport, Physical Education and the Gaeltacht. He's had a very, very busy time of late. He's just come back from attending the Paralympics in Paris, a most exciting event. Will you please welcome our Minister, Thomas Byrne.
I kind of got a fright when Liz said that Jezio Bene was going to be speaking tonight, because is he not busy for tomorrow night? I was kind of thinking. So I'm really glad he's not actually here, but I'm very grateful that he's imparted a few words to us tonight, because I think it is wonderful to see a really distinguished past student of this institution. I think that's just fabulous to keep that connection. I think it's really, really important to do that, especially with the emphasis that you have on sport here. And I want to really thank you all for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here tonight. I think it's a unique gathering. It's really, really important. There's such a variety of people in the audience, from students to academics to teachers, but also your guest speakers. I mean, I'm the Minister giving the opening speech, but the guest speakers that you have here tonight are true experts in their fields. I think their observations and opinions are really worth listening to, and we do that as well at central government level. I think it's really important that you're emphasising sport. Sport plays a huge role, as we know, in physical and mental well-being, and in Ireland in particular, I find it is the glue that connects communities and generations. Sport is important in terms of its social benefits and can be at the heart of a flourishing, active life and of strong, vibrant communities. And when I was at the college football classic there a couple of weeks ago between Florida State and Georgia Tech, it really struck me that in America, a lot of sport is based around schools, higher education institutions, universities. I'm not familiar with the community sports in the USA, but I think in Ireland, we really excel at community level sport all around the place. And this institution is one such community, there's no two ways about it. More people, it has to be said, are members of sports clubs than any other form of voluntary or community organisation. Participation in sporting activity by migrants and people from ethnic minority backgrounds can tackle social exclusion and can bring people together. I think we've really seen that over the course of not just the Olympics, but the Paralympics as well. Our national sports policy references the importance of participation in sport and physical activity for our collective well-being and health as a nation. The role of physical activity in potentially reducing depression, anxiety and psychological distress and emotional disturbance is well established, and it's in our national interest to get more people involved in sport. So as a government, we're working on ways to, not that we're promoting or doing the work, but facilitating the experts who are doing the work to promote lifelong participation in sport in every sector of society and in every community. We want a sport for all approach. And we want to make sure that people are involved in sport regardless of age, socio-economic status, disability, or membership of, for example, the LGBT community, traveller community, or indeed other ethnic minorities. Inclusion means to make people welcome, and sport is a way of doing this. When people ask me, what's your job as Minister for Sport? Yes, there's a lot of attractive things about being Minister for Sport, but fundamentally, the most important part of being Minister for Sport is to increase the rate of sports participation among the community. And we measure this, Sport Ireland measured this, and at the moment we have an official participation rate of 47%, but the ambition is to increase that to 60% by 2027. It's a very high target, and a number of years ago the target was changed from 50% to 60%, and if we had left it at 50%, we'd be celebrating, oh, we've reached our targets, and yes, we would have reached our targets, but maybe not enough people would have been taking part in sports. We raised the target to a very high level. And we can only get to that level if we're utilising everything in society to get people involved in sport. Every corner of society, every type of community, including educational communities such as the Tramore campus. And that's really, really important. So we call this participation gradient between men and women. So there's more men than women taking part in sport. But actually that has narrowed significantly in recent years, and it's almost level. There's, I think, a 2% gap at the moment. And there has been significant investment, not just by government, but by sports organisations and indeed commercial organisations as well, to encourage more women to get involved in sport. But we need to address other issues around sports participation. There's a massive socioeconomic participation gap, and Sport Ireland are working on that. I know that in fairness to the education and training boards in Cork is no exception. You're at the cold face of that, but we've got to get more people from a wider set of social backgrounds involved in sport. We cannot allow sport to become a middle class event that people who can afford to go to it, so that's got to change. There's also a gap as well for people with disabilities as well. They have fewer opportunities, and I think that is something we have to address. And recently I've asked Sport Ireland to appoint a national disability lead in sport, which would be similar to their Women in Sport lead. Again, to try and not just activate more people to be involved in sport for people with disabilities, but to engage with the national sports bodies, to engage with the education sector. Again, institutions such as Tramore campus, but not just to tell them what to do, but find out what the best practices are around the country in terms of getting more people involved. In terms of sports funding, the aim of the government is to double the funding by 2027. We actually will, I'm pretty sure we'll reach that. We may reach it next year from the starting point, which is 2018. So that's happening. We have two major sports facilities funds, which is one is the Sports Capital Programme. I'll be announcing that in a few weeks, and the other is the Large Scale Sports Infrastructure Fund. I know that the college here has applied for some funding from that, so we'll have to see what we can do, but I know they want to improve this particular hall and again get better sports facilities because they're needed. And one of the key things we have committed to in government, I'm in the Department of Education and the Department of Sport, is to get those links between sport and education even stronger. I think this campus is a really, really good example of that. We have the National Sports Campus in Dublin, and I know, it's not in Cork, and someone said to me we need another one in Cork. I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think we need all our high-performing athletes in one place. However, we do need things in Cork, and one of them is a 50-metre pool. I met the Dolphin Committee today, and we'll have further engagement with the City and County Council about the provision of a 50-metre pool in Cork. Is something we would like to see. The councils will have to come with their proposals, but we're certainly encouraging them to do that. In terms of athletics, I know that's been a big issue. We recently opened the MTU track, a very important track. We're working with quite a number of other clubs as well, in Carrigaline and Bandon and some other places as well, to get new tracks up and running. And we'll see in a few weeks when the sports grants are announced as to what the situation will be. I can't preempt any particular announcements on that, but let's just say we're very conscious of the position of athletics in Cork, and that more tracks are needed. Ironically enough, athletics around the country overall is not too bad, but there's definitely a big gap here in Cork. Now the questions, we're about to, just I'll say as a final word, we have a national sports policy, and from that there's a sports action plan. It will be published now in the coming weeks when the government approves it. This will have 40 distinct actions that we want to do in terms of sports. It covers everything from participation to facilities to, access by people with disabilities, or access by other people as well. The whole area of drugs and doping and all of that. But some of the questions that we have, and again, it's conferences such as this that I hope will start to answer and continue to ask some of these questions. Fundamentally, how do we get that participation up to 60%? How do we get more people taking part in sport? What are the factors that's I won't say holding that back, because it is going up, but what are the factors that are needed to be met to reach the 60%? How do we secure future investment needs? And that's really, really important. How do we make the sports sector more inclusive for people from various backgrounds, particularly people with disabilities? How can we begin to plan for our future facilities needs, where we locate them, and what type would be needed given the changing population dynamics? How best do we deepen connections between education institutions and sports clubs? And that's a good question for here, I think. How best to prepare for the various environmental issues which are here with us, but are very much coming down the road? How can we better support the sports sector's capacity and capability to respond to all the challenges that the sports sector faces? And these are just some of the questions that we are always thinking about, and we love to get feedback on. I want to commend the Cork ETB and your partners, and the Tramore campus in particular, for organising tonight's event. I've no doubt it will be really, really informative and rewarding for everybody with an interest in sport. I want to wish all the students every success in your future endeavours. I want to particularly thank those who are taking on the Leaving Cert PE course, because I know quite a few of them are here, absolutely no doubt that you would be better off for having done Leaving Cert PE, but also society would be better off with the knowledge that you have and the information that you're going to be able to impart. And it's particularly impressive as well that some of the teachers of Leaving Cert PE have started off here in the Tramore campus as well, because they're imparting all that information to the students and examining them. I think it's really, really important, and I just want to commend you all on that, and wish you luck in the exams that you do, because it's not an easy subject. It's probably a very enjoyable one, but it's not easy. I hope that all the students' dreams become realities. You work hard, you are determined, but that you always leave time, and this is where I failed today because I didn't go to the gym, but you leave time in your busy schedules for sport, fitness and exercise. You won't regret it, that's for certain, but I did miss it today, so I'm really not speaking. This is accountability for me that I'll go in the morning now again. So. Anyway, we're up on square. Gan bhuichas le gataine agah as tatan seo an ucht, tá cinse muine is Tarva as an ócáid seo an ucht. So thanks very much for the invitation. I wish you every success with the discussions you're having tonight, and every success in the college as well. It's a fabulous institution with a fantastic mission. They're not just here turning out students, they're really creating an environment where people can learn and be the best possible citizens of the future of Vermont.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister, and we really do appreciate your presence here tonight. It is so important. Right, we're going to move from the Minister now, and I'm delighted to welcome someone with a past association with this college here. He did his teacher training here at one stage. He's now the Professor of Clinical Exercise Physiology at Dublin City University, and I think many of you will be familiar with his face because you'll have seen him on the popular TV programme Operation Transformation. Not that any of you needed transforming. Looking at you here, you all look so fit. He's long been encouraging us all to look after our physical and our mental well-being. Will you please welcome Professor Niall Moynihan.
That would be very, very helpful. I know which way I'm going. I'll bring it back to the start here, like I'm hitting the wrong button here. Okay, as I said, I was a student teacher here back in 1979. What I remember most about my visit here was how this institution made this school made me feel. I was a third-year student teacher, and the day I walked into the school, I was treated as though I was a member of staff. And 44 years later, I still remember that. It was so important to be made to feel welcome. Joe Hart, who was here tonight, was the PE teacher. He was so lucky because Joe didn't have to come to work for 4 weeks, and I did all the work for him, and he got paid. It was great, right? It was great. I want to really thank the Minister for being here. First of all, very impressive. He actually jumped up on. I had to walk up the steps. He jumped on up here. So he's doing pretty good. And what I like about the Minister, he has a genuine passion. He's not one of these guys that reads a piece of paper. I know him for a number of years. He genuinely believes in the importance of sport, physical activity and well-being, but most important, inclusivity, that every person should have the opportunity to avail of some forms of sport that's ideal for them. Now, I'm a physiologist and I was going to give a talk on health tonight. And then I asked who were the target audience, and I was told it was the students. So I decided I'm not going to talk about health to students because they think they're going to live forever, and nothing's an issue. So instead I'm going to talk about my life journey and to tell you that nothing's impossible. Anything is possible if you want it. And I suppose I'll start off, if I can get this right this time, with George Bernard Shaw. Many of us think now that life is about finding ourselves. Well, George Bernard Shaw said it's not about finding ourselves, it's about creating ourselves. That's what life is about. And all of us are unique individuals. I work in the area of molecular genetics. We're all genetically different. There's no two people the same. So there's no one size that's going to fit all of us. That's just the reality. And as the saying goes, the shoe that fits one person pinches another person. So there's no recipe for living that suits all cases. However, I want to share with you the lessons that I have learned, that I think particularly that I've learned from sport and from my involvement in health research. The first lesson is that most endeavours in life are extremely challenging. And to be successful, this is not the journey you're going to take. This is the journey you're going to take. That's the reality of life. Now, I am a professor of physiology at DCU, and I work primarily looking at the role of exercise in chronic diseases, like cancer, pulmonary hypertension, heart failure, all of these chronic diseases that afflict our modern society. Our hospital, or our healthcare system, is an old, outdated, 120-year-old system that's based on acute illness. Hospitals are brilliant for treating acute illnesses. They're brilliant. If you get a heart attack or you have an acute infection, that's the place to go. But they do an abysmal job of treating chronic diseases. Absolutely abysmal job. In fact, the most important slide I'm going to show tonight is this one. Is that exercise is as close as we have come to a magic bullet in medicine. There's no pharmacological intervention, there's no surgical intervention that can come close to doing what exercise does. Just walking in here tonight, most of you activated around 2,000 genes. The blood flowed along your blood vessels, and that it's like water flowing along a river. And it remodeled your blood vessels and keeps them healthy. There's nothing else can do that, and it's totally and utterly underappreciated, particularly by the medical profession. In addition to my work in academia, my other passion in life is sport. And in particular, my two sports are athletics and Gaelic football. I'm actually involved with St. Vincent's hurling team this year. Monaghan Land being involved with the hurling team is a very dangerous thing, but anyway, I'm trying my best. And if we take a look at one of the lessons we learned, and I think these guys won the All-Ireland this year, this is the Clare team. I think they beat Cork, is that correct? I'm from Monaghan, but I think that's what happened. And when you see, you see the day of the final, and what you see is the iceberg effect. You see the performance. But what you don't realise is what sport does is the other things that sport develops. In addition to the skills and everything else, is the ability to communicate, your leadership, teamwork, your loyalty, to be able to accept criticism, deal with adversity, honesty, all of these things. These are the transferable skills you learn from playing sport. And according to the World Economic Forum, they're some of the most important skills that the major industries in the world are going to be looking for in the 21st century. And I can assure you that the Leaving Cert does a pretty poor job at evaluating those. They're these soft, transferable skills that you get from playing sport. And they're undervalued. And that's why it's so important we get more people playing sport than just those, that 10% that tend to be involved in competitive sport. Competitive sport can be brutal. It's gladiators going into the arena. Okay? But it helps to develop leadership qualities. And let me just give you a simple example. This is a former student of ours. His name is Johnny Cooper. He went to DCU, he studied sports science and health. Johnny Cooper set the standards for Dublin's 9 All-Irelands, with 8 of them. The players will tell you, Johnny set the standards. Was he the best player in the team? Not by a country mile. But I show you this photograph here that was taken after Johnny won his first All-Ireland final. He walked the full length of the field after the All-Ireland final, and he put his hands around the opposition's goalkeeper, who had a stinker that day. And the reason he did it, because they were both teammates in DCU playing on the Sigerson team. That's what sport does. That's the unique thing that sport will do for us all. In fact, on that team, you have 2 future All-Ireland winning captains, and you have, I think, 84 All-Ireland medals, senior football All-Ireland medals within that photograph. And to be a guy that was a leader of that group, a guy that really pushed standards, that tells you. This is the same photograph, and the reason I show it is, 1 week after Johnny won his first All-Ireland, he brought in that jersey in a frame and handed it to me to thank me. That's what sport teaches us. I grew up in North Monaghan, God's country up here, okay? And it's right on the border, so this is the village of Scottstown, right on the border with Fermanagh and Tyrone. And when I was growing up, I only wanted to be one person, and that was a guy called George Best. He was the best soccer player in the world, and I was in the 1960s, and I wanted to be George Best. I figured out pretty quickly I wasn't going to be George Best. So I went to school in St. McCartney's College in Monaghan. Okay, it was a boarding school, and in fact, that's the room where I slept with my 2 brothers in my first year in secondary school. These are the classrooms over on the other side, over here. I don't know if this is actually showing, is it? No, you can't see the pointer. So, just to show you that I was destined to be a professor, that I was a precocious academic student, I want to show you my pre-junior cert. It was called the Intercert back in 1974. so you can see why I was destined for greatness. That's my results of my pre-intercept. An E, a D, a D, an E, a C, and a C, and they're all past subjects. And by the way, there was no remark, there was no need for a remark. But what I remember from my time in school, my first 3 years in school, I was told, teachers labelled me. They assigned me labels. I was lazy, I was bad news, I was cheeky, I was a troublemaker, and the one that really pissed me off, I was stupid. I had to stand up at a table one day, put my hands over my head and say, I am a moron. And that's not a nice thing when you're 15. And not a nice thing to have to do. And the reason I put this up is, labels will often define other people's expectations of you. And to all the young people here tonight, what I want to say to you, don't let others limit your expectations. Each one and every one of you in this room, however ordinary others may perceive you to be, each one of you have a unique talent. And it's that unique talent that makes every one of us unique. It will allow some of you to do some things that are extraordinary, perhaps until now even thought impossible. You all have a unique talent. But don't let expectations, for example, if I said to you, I want you to play, I love table tennis, so say for example, someone comes along, they have no arms, and I say, well, let's go and play table tennis. You would laugh at me. If I ask someone to shoot a bow and arrow with no arms, or to do a high jump with no arms, or with one leg, to cycle with one leg, or to swim with no arms or legs, you would laugh at me. Because the expectation is they shouldn't be able to do it. You put the limits on what you can achieve. And to show you this, I'm going to tell you a little story about a little girl called Wilma. This is a true story. Wilma was born prematurely, 4.5 pounds, on the 23rd of June 1940. She was the 20th of her father's 22 children from 2 marriages. She lived in Tennessee in abject poverty. And because the colour of her skin, the night her mother went to give birth to Wilma, she was turned away from the hospital. And she gave birth to a child at home because of the colour of her skin. She was nursed to health by her mother and her close-knit family. By the age of 4, Wilma contracted the measles, the mumps, scarlet fever, chickenpox, and pneumonia. Okay? She overcame all of those. But at the age of 4, she contracted infantile paralysis caused by the poliomyelitis virus. She was infected with polio. She recovered from the virus and was told that she would never walk properly again. Now I want you to look at the photograph of a 4-year-old girl. That's what happens when you get polio. It's a devastating disease. A devastating disease. Wilma needed braces and an orthopedic shoe just to be able to walk. Wilma told her mother she wanted to learn to walk again. That was her one ambition. She's a 4-year-old child with her life ahead of her. But the doctor said their expectations were, wear your brace and be happy. Her mother put her on a bus and took her 40 kilometres to an African-American hospital where she got massaged twice a week. She would then take her home and she would get daily massages on her leg by her family members. And against the wishes of her doctor, she took off the braces when she was 9, and Wilma learned to walk when she was 12. If you really want to do something, you can do it. If a 4-year-old girl can learn to walk after being told that she would never walk again, anything is possible. And another example is this lady here. This is the first American female athlete to win 3 Olympic gold medals in the Summer Olympic Games. Now, to go to the Olympic Games, you have to be a bit of a genetic freak. But to get to 3 Olympic finals and to win 3 Olympic gold medals, she won the 100 metres in a world record. She was part of the 4x100 metres relay team that broke the world record. And this is her crossing the line to win the women's 200 metres. You have to be pretty special to win 3 Olympic gold medals. My friends, that is Wilma. That is Wilma Rudolph. She didn't just teach herself to walk again. She became the fastest woman on earth. Think about that for a moment. Being told that you would never walk. Anything is possible if you want it badly enough. Anything is possible. That's the story. Don't let some other people's expectations put a label on you that you think you're no good. You all have that unique talent. Go and use it. Find out what it is. Whether it's a musician, a barber, a doctor, a scientist, whatever it is, you figure out what talent you actually have. So I actually left that school I was in Monaghan, okay? In fact, I got kicked out, but that's another scale, okay? And I went to the help of my uncle. I got into the Morris College, St Mary's College in Dundalk. It was a boarding school as well. And during my first year, it was 1974, okay? At that stage, tuberculosis was still a rampant disease. Tuberculosis is an infectious disease caused by a microbacterium tuberculosis, and it affects the lungs. So what they would do is they would send around a truck to the school, and everyone went in and got an X-ray. So I went in and I got an X-ray, and my parents then got a letter telling me urgently to go to St Vincent's Hospital in Dublin to see Professor Richard Mulcahy because I had an enlarged heart. You see my heart here, this big enlarged heart. Okay? So I went to see Richard Mulcahy, famous Mulcahy family from the Civil War. He was 50 years ahead of his time. He was a preventive cardiologist. And when I was in the hospital, okay, he put me on a contraption that didn't look near as nice as this was back in the mid-70s. I was fascinated. And I kept asking him questions. He had all these ECG leads. And I was just fascinated. And he took the time. It was again that moment in life when someone said, take the time, spend about 20 minutes, explain my heart, how it worked. I left St Vincent's Hospital saying, I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing that. Whatever that is. And I found out it was exercise physiology. There was no exercise physiology in Ireland. The only place I could do it was in the United States. I certainly wasn't going to go to the UK. I'm from North Monaghan, so I decided I'd go to America. So that gave me the passion. Now I had a drive. And in the Morris, after my 2 years, I'd been told I was a moron and I was stupid. On prize giving night of my final year in the Morris St Mary's College in Dundalk, I received the Outstanding Sports Person of the Year and the highest points, or the highest score in my pre-leaving cert, the highest academic award. But I can tell you truly, I was never the smartest guy in any class I was in. Never. But I can tell you, no one ever worked harder than I did. No one ever outstudied me, because I was driven. I wanted to become an exercise physiologist, and whatever that was going to take. And it became very clear to me very, very early in life that you didn't have to be talented to be labelled academically bright. You didn't have to be labelled academically bright to be successful in life either. What I did find out was the things that really define who you are, that really determine if you're going to be successful, are work ethic, an attitude, your effort, your passion, your body language, your punctuality, and being prepared. None of these require talent. They require a mindset. And that's what makes people successful. If you really want it and you have the mindset, and what Dundalk, St Mary's Dundalk really did to me, and I'm going to use, you've all heard this before, but I'm going to use the words of William Butler Yeats. I told students this morning on our first day of term. I said, I hope you're not coming here to pass an exam. You're coming here to light a fire. So when this semester's over, I want you going to the library, you want to get more information. So education is not about filling your head with nonsense. It's about lighting a fire. And you want to go out and you want to get more and more information in something that you're really, really keen on. Because you know something, the reality is that you will never stop learning, because life never stops teaching. So it's important you get that genuine interest in education. I went to the University of Limerick, where I studied PE for 4 years, because it was the only way I was going to do exercise physiology. Then I decided to go to America. So I went to the state of Indiana, and you can see the capital is Indianapolis, and between Indianapolis and Chicago, there's a town called West Lafayette, okay, where Purdue University is actually located. Okay, it's a stunningly beautiful campus in the middle of a cornfield in Indiana. Okay, it's very, very famous for aeronautic engineering. Okay, chemistry, engineering, and agriculture. This is the aeronautic engineering building, both for aeronautics and astronautics. And outside the front of it is a statue. And the statue is of a guy looking up to the moon. Now you have to be a really special person to have a statue commemorated for you, particularly if you're still alive. Because this person was alive the day that the statue was commemorated, the building was opened. He's one of the most iconic men of the 20th century. He was a student in Purdue University. And on the 21st of July 1969, he became the first human being to walk on another planet. Imagine looking back and seeing your own planet being the first person to do that. That was Neil Armstrong. And believe it or not, the lunar module that landed on the moon, he had 5 seconds of fuel left when he landed on the moon. There's more computer power in your iPhone than there was in the lunar module in 1969. During my first, the reason I say this is that during this whole thing is messed up here on the screen, but I hope it's probably messed up there as well. Anyway, I've figured out what I'm going to say here. During my first semester, because I was a foreign student, I was actually invited to dinner with Neil Armstrong. And the one thing I remember, and I remember this the day I died, was his humility. He could have become a multi-millionaire, traveled the world. He didn't make a cent from the first man to walk on the moon. Because he felt, because he was given that privilege, he had an onus to the rest of civilization not to become financially beneficial because of it. He was an extremely humble guy, much more interested in us than talking about himself. And I make the same point. I had the pleasure of having many of these guys play for me in PCU. Brian Cullen, Michael Murphy, Stephen Cluxton, James McCarthy. And all of these guys have gone on to captain their teams to win All Irelands. You see, it's really messed up. They're really phenomenal individuals. But what makes them all unique is their humility. You never see Brian Cullen, Stephen Cluxton, Michael Murphy, or James McCarthy in the press. They're not looking for that sort of affirmation. And that's what sport taught. That's what leaders are made of. 7 days after winning his All-Ireland medal, as captain of the team, was a third-year student at 21 years of age. Michael Murphy was sitting in the front desk of a physiology lecture, while the rest of the all were inebriated. That's what great leaders do. So I left. This is really, there we are now, I think we're back on. I then left Purdue University, and I went to the University of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a beautiful city. You have 2 rivers converging, the Monongahela and the Allegheny, to form the Ohio River. It is the second biggest medical center in the United States. Okay? You can see downtown in the background, and this is the Oakland campus, about 3 kilometers. This is that tall building you see over there on your right. That's called the Cathedral of Learning. And the Cathedral of Learning is the tallest education building in the world, and that's what the inside looks like. But it's got labs, it's got cafeteria, and as you go further up the building, there are classrooms. And this is the designated Irish classroom within that building. When I was a student there, okay, this is where the Pittsburgh Steelers play, and they have won 6 Super Bowls, so the university team played down there along with the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is really messed up. I then worked with the hockey team when I was in Pittsburgh, and they won the Stanley Cup. And the reason I bring this up, these are the, let's say, Ronaldo and Messi of hockey, the 2 greatest players ever to play. This is Mario Lemieux, who played for Pittsburgh, and this is Wayne Gretzky, who played initially for the Edmonton Oilers. The 2 greatest players ever to play. What I remember about Mario Lemieux, he captained the team to 2 Stanley Cups, he worked harder than any player on the team. Hard work. Although he was the best player in the world, he worked harder than any other player. The lesson, hard work, will always pay off. And when I was actually a student, I worked as a bellman in one of the hotels. And the team, the football and hockey and baseball team, would stay in the hotel. So the New York Rangers were playing the Pittsburgh Penguins in the Stanley Cup, which is the big tournament in hockey. And the scouting report came through for the Pittsburgh team, and I had to bring it up to the manager of the New York Rangers. So of course I'm in the elevator and I'm looking at it came through on the fax at that stage back in the late 80s, and I'm reading, and it's been through all the players, good on the left, good on the right, weak, blah blah, and I came to Mario Lemieux, he said 3 words: God on ice. That was the scouting report. He was just a phenomenal ice hockey player. So, again, this is really messed up, so hopefully we'll get it heard all together first. No, it doesn't. So for you guys, particularly the young students here, there is nothing more important for you than your health. Absolutely nothing. For example, tobacco use, your diet, your physical activity levels, your alcohol use, your stress levels, your sleep, your substance abuse, they're what we call lifestyle risk factors. And they determine whether you're going to get disease or not. And I'm going to give you a simple example. This is the artery that supplies your brain. Okay? This is a normal artery, and there's an artery here, as you can see, the yellow is the plaque. Because it's a superficial artery, we can actually measure how much plaque is in that artery. So this is a study we did. We took a group of individuals, and we did an exercise test in the lab to find out how much plaque was in their arteries. So this one, the one in red over on your left, is the low fit, the blue is the moderately fit, and the yellow is the high-fit individuals. We put them on a treadmill, we measure their VO2 max, you can't see it here, but anyway, the fitter you were, the less plaque you had. Then we just took the low-fit group, those in the low-fit group, and we said, well, what makes them unique? We found that 64% of the low-fit group were obese, 75% had high blood pressure, 62% were insulin resistant, which means they're one step away from developing diabetes, and the average age of their blood vessels of the low-fit group were those of an individual between 55 and 60 years of age. The participants in the study were transition year students who had a vascular age of 55. And that's why I can't understand why it's not compulsory that every child in school undergoes a fitness test. Because if I'm a parent and I told my kids in the bottom 20%, the likelihood is they have cardiometabolic disease. Because at the tender age of 15, they've increased their risk for a stroke and for vascular dementia, just at the age of 15. That's the student who actually did the study, Sinead Shearer, at the age of 15. We also measured the health of the coronary arteries. So we can do a test. If you go out and go outside and run, the blood vessels will widen so more blood can flow through them. So we can stress the coronary arteries, we can find out can they widen, how much they can widen. They should dilate, they should widen around 12 to 15%. And as you can see, the low-fit kids in this study, the red one here, their coronary arteries can only dilate half as much as the high-fit kids. Not alone did they have cerebrovascular disease that's going to increase their risk for stroke, they also had cardiovascular disease that was going to increase their risk for having a heart attack. And that's at 15 years of age. So the bottom line is, exercise is very, very important. I'm not going to go through these don't work. So, I'm going to finish off. I'm sorry if these slides are all loaded up with one another. So, here's the final few messages I want to give you. And I want you to think of these as you walk home. Guys, time is precious. Don't waste it. Because believe it or not, tomorrow is promised to absolutely no one. That's important. And remember, life's not a rehearsal. At my age, I'm 65, I can't rewind and start, well, I'll try second time and see if it goes a little bit different, although it'll be a lot different, okay? I am, as I say, I am chronologically 65, I hope I'm biologically 35, and my students tell me I'm developmentally 15. That's a great combination when you're 65. Believe you me, it's a great combination. So I'm going to finish off with a story, hoping it will resonate with you, particularly the students who are here today. I think it's important, the story resonates. It's a true story of a guy who walked into an underground subway in Washington, D.C. one morning. It was a cold January morning, and he arrived into the subway station at 7:40. He was wearing a baseball cap, okay? And at 7:51, in the middle of morning rush hour traffic, he began to start playing his violin. He performed for 43 minutes. And out of 1,097 people who passed him, 27 gave him money, and only 7 people stopped to listen to this guy playing the violin. He made 32 euros. After he played the violin, he put it back in his case and walked up the escalator. Unbeknownst to the commuters, the guy playing the violin was the greatest violinist on earth. He was playing a violin that was made in 1713 and cost $2 million. 2 nights previously, he played to a sold-out concert in Carnegie Hall, and the cheapest ticket was €100. Sorry? Get this again. Okay? He performed during that session that he performed for around 40 minutes. He performed the most exquisite pieces of music ever written for a violin. But unfortunately, on that January morning, all these people were running around doing the mundane things of life, that they didn't hear this music that was coming from heaven, because they were too caught up with these mundane things of life. And for many of you here today, life is not meant to be lived through a screen. Life is actually meant to be lived. So instead of enjoying and being in moments, we spend considerably, particularly your generation, you spend too much time capturing the world through your phones. In fact, your current generation, you don't smell the roses. You would never hear a violinist because you don't even see the roses anymore because your head is stuck in the phone. And it's affecting both your physical and your mental health. So in conclusion, and I'm sorry that those slides were messed up. In conclusion, I want you to remember that life was never meant to be lived through a screen. That's very, very important. Because folks, life is fragile. It's precious and it's unpredictable. I did a 3-year postdoctoral research fellowship in immunology in Children's Hospital at the University of Pittsburgh. I walked into a ward with 45 beds, and every one of those children knew they were going to die within 6 months. Not one of those kids would have ripped off my hand if I could have given them 1 more day to live. 1 more hour, never mind 1 more week. And we just take it for granted. We don't appreciate our health until illness comes. It's the most important thing we have as human beings is our health. Because the day you get a diagnosis of a terminal illness, even if you're Steve Jobs and you're one of the richest men on earth, it's no good. Our health is the most important thing that we have. So life is precious. Life isn't fair. It isn't tied with a bow, but life is still a gift. It's still good. And remember, personal happiness is not a checklist of qualifications, achievements, and acquisitions. So the message that I really want to give you to take home is, take the time to enjoy life. It only goes one way, guys. It only goes one way. So the message is, live long, laugh a lot, and stay happy. Thank you.
Professor Niall Moyna, ladies and gentlemen. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a question for Niall or other speakers, we will have a facility for that in a little while from now. Aside altogether from what you heard now talk about his career there, he has also been, over the last 12 months, of course, Niall, been working behind the scenes with the Louth football team. Reached the Leinster final and did very well against the Dubs. You did, of course, knock Cork out of the championship. We move on. It'll be forgotten in about 20 years' time. By the way, there is, as I say, questions here, and I have what I call it here. It's a menti.com number, which I'll give you a little bit later on if you want to ask a question. Wendy will be able to compile all of those for us. Right, let's move on then. I'm going to switch the emphasis now from physiology to nutrition. You heard Niall mention nutrition a little while ago. Our next speaker is Head of Performance Nutrition at Sport Ireland Institute and Adjunct Professor at the University of Limerick, she was telling me as well. She's worked across many team sports, individual sports and weight category sports and has supported several Olympic medals and world champions. She's delivered nutritional support to athletes over some 6 or 7 Olympic cycles at this stage and other major championships such as European and World Championships as well. So she's well worth listening to. We're delighted to welcome Professor Sharon Madigan. Sharon.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to run the gauntlet now of this. Technically, this is in here. There we go. Okay, let's hope this works. Just to say thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It's always difficult to follow Niall and the Minister, of course, so I hope that tonight I'm going to give you a bit of a flavour for the performance element in terms of nutrition. And I talk about that from a mental performance piece, which is really important in terms of your leaving cert year. Obviously the mummies and daddies to look after them and the teachers to have the mental capacity to do all that as well. The physical bit, but one of the things, and it kind of underpins everything, and Niall has really said that as well, is in terms of athletes, and I work from elite right down to our club teams or perform, or anybody that's participating, if you're not healthy, you can't perform. It's that simple. So I mean, we have to look at this in terms of making sure that that body is able to do the work that you need to do on a daily basis, and then that allows you then to perform as well. I'm going to this work now. Yeah. So what we're aiming to try and do is health and performance, because that gives you the ability to be able to be available to the coach and the manager to select you. Again, what we're looking at, and has anybody heard this term, marginal gains? Have we heard that? Yeah? Kind of coined by the cycling community in Sky. I'm not sure, maybe some of the marginal gains might have been a wee bit dodgy, but in terms of what we're looking for is, I would say word leading basics is actually more important, right? Because we're always looking to think, like, is that a quick fix? Is it are we doing something? And quite often a lot of people take their eye off the basics ball, and then what happens is actually they never get to these marginal gains as well. And from my point of view, food is the fuel that does that, because what you're looking to do is underpin all of those pieces of that jigsaw puzzle that actually make you able to do the work, study, do your day-to-day things, making sure that we grow, we develop, we do all of these bits and pieces as well. So, one size doesn't fit all, right? So we've heard this, here we're going to hear it again. Everybody's different. But with social media, apparently we all have to do the same. Not right? We all have to look a certain way. So, I mean, we looked at some of those footballers there and some of that. Yes, okay, there's a physique there. But I have a number, I use it quite a lot actually with women in sport, where I have a slide where there's every shape and size in terms of that picture. And the one thread that goes through all of those particular individuals, whether they're 4'11" or 7 foot, or they're 100 kilos or they're 50 kilos, is they all have an Olympic medal. They are not the one size. So this idea that we have to look like this textbook out of Instagram or TikTok or whatever the hell it is, I mean, that just has a massive impact negatively on how you go about this. And unfortunately, from my point of view, we all think that to look a certain way, then we have to eat a certain way. And yes, there is some element of truth in that, but unfortunately for those that are training quite a lot, we actually have to remember that it's really important that we put enough fuel into the tank to allow you to do the work that you're going to do. Now, has any of the mommies and daddies ever experienced this? Coming in from school like a bag of cats? Yeah? Maybe some of you have experienced it yourselves. This is something that we see in an awful lot. I see it with my kids coming in from school. I have to actually bring sandwiches and stuff to go and pick them up, because, you just couldn't work with them. And part of that is, there's a couple of things coming into that. What time they've had lunch? Did they do something after school and they haven't had anything? Has anybody ever been in a situation where you haven't had breakfast? Yeah? So again, you're behind the curve, and you're certainly going to be in a position where we have that, because guess what? The brain needs energy too. So there's this idea that we can, quite happily take an extra 10, 15 minutes in bed. Absolutely, we'll all go for that. And that quite often is at the expense of breakfast. So how do you think that brain's going to react to that? And it's really important, because if there's not enough fuel going into the tank to cover the costs of the physiological piece, the movement, etc., then the one place which actually is a big consumer of fuel that's going to be impacted is your brain. So teachers, do you ever see ones coming in the morning, not concentrating, can't answer questions, can't remember who they are, what's their name? All of these things are regular occurrences. And why is the brain important? Well, if we think outside that concentration piece in terms of that school and college and studying, etc., but if we think, are there many sports that need some technical ability? Yeah, you need to be able to concentrate on that. You need to be able to repeat the effort, important as well. You need to focus on the task, and whether that's your schoolwork, whether it's focusing on the task of repeating something in terms of the sport that you're doing, listening to the coach that's telling you some kind of technique or some type of technical piece, or actually just listening to the instruction that's coming from the sideline. Are you ever grumpy with others? Oh, it was their fault, that was a bad pass. That ever happen? Yeah? And fatigue and tiredness, and again, any teachers, coaches, managers here, if you've got Patrick or, Jacinta coming out and you're going, okay, which one of them's going to show up tonight? They're great some nights, and ask that of yourselves. Are there times in a week where you come out to training and you're flying and you could run all night and everything's great, and the next day you're just a different person? Does that ever happen? So that doesn't come down with, fitness, and it doesn't come down to lack of fitness. Quite often that's the lifestyle factors that we need to put right. Have you recovered well? Have you slept? Have you drunk enough water or had enough fluids? I mean, we live in an environment where last weekend we were sitting at 24 degrees one day, and then suddenly the next it was 12. So all of those things then can have a knock-on effect on some of the other things. And really for us, it's about making sure that we have enough energy in the tank to do all the things that we have. And if we look at this performance nutrition pyramid, and this is the bit that I think is really interesting, right? Everybody focuses on the top bit of that, which is supplementation. Because that's the answer to everything, okay? The difficulty is that it is the very top of that particular pyramid. And if the basics aren't right, if you haven't actually got the energy in the tank to be able to do what you're trying to do, no amount of supplements is going to make it right. And actually what it will do is it will take your eye off the ball because you think, oh, I'm taking protein, or I'm taking this, or I'm taking that, and that's going to make it all right. Now, the point is, if I've got a prop in rugby and they're consuming lots of protein or whatever, I really don't care in a flippant enough way. If I've got the winger that actually has to run, do I want them consuming? I used to work with one of the provinces, and I remember one guy coming down with 6 chicken breasts on his plate for lunch. What happens when you eat 6 chicken breasts? Number one, you don't want to be beside them for a while afterwards, probably, right? That's the first thing. But what do you think happens in terms of the fuel? When you sit down to 6 chicken breasts, what do you think you're able to eat lots of other things? No, because it displaces all the other bits and pieces. So when you focus on one nutrient over another, and that's what we have at the moment, where protein is the answer to all our problems, and some of the other nutrients are definitely they're not even the good, but they're the bad and the ugly. And that's a problem because it's still not going to answer our question. So what we have to do is look at the basics. Yes, then we have to look at those macronutrients, which are our carbohydrates, our fats, our protein, absolutely, our fluids. Then we put on top of that, so we're layering it up a little bit. So we're looking at our vitamins and minerals, our fiber, those types of things. Then we look at the training and frequency, and one of the common questions I'll ask any athlete that I'm working with is, do you train the same way every day? And they go, no. And the second question I'll ask them is, do you eat the same way every day? Absolutely, yes. So there's your mismatch straight away, because you're not looking at when you're training, you're eating just because you eat at those times every single day. So it's really important that, particularly on that supplementation piece, they are the sprinkles on the cake. And if the cake's not there, no point in putting any sprinkles on top of it. So that's important as well. We have to look at the basics to make sure that that's right, rather than looking at some of the other things that are being sold to you on social media as the best thing that you can do. And that's one word that's really important, and that is sold to you. You have to buy it, usually. It costs money, and therefore somebody's marketing it, and somebody's making a lot of money out of it. And we can do things well, but we don't need to spend a huge amount of money on that as well. So, are you fueling correctly for your specific sport? If you're a swimmer versus a marathon runner versus a boxer versus a basketballer versus a camogie player, all very different, because then you have to put on top of that, what's your age and stage? So unfortunately, we've had we have to look at some of the effects that maybe COVID has had, and we have a lot of team sports that was impacted. And what I'm seeing on the back of that is a lot of people, particularly girls, where they haven't eaten enough for the amount of work that they've done. They've actually changed their training during that period of time where, they wouldn't have done a huge amount of running. They would have trained in their teams. But then when COVID was there, they had to go out, and suddenly they introduced 5Ks, 10Ks, longer periods of running, and they weren't fueled well enough for that, and that has a big impact, particularly on things like menstrual cycle, which then has a big impact on your bone health and growth as well. And again, I'm bringing that back because this is a big question I always get. If you Google sports nutrition, the first thing that comes up is supplements. So again, are we eating enough for what we're doing? Is the quality of those good enough? And are we eating things like the fruit and veg, which I know is boring, but is important as well? So we want to balance the books here. That's really important with what we're trying to do. And everybody's different. So, what we sometimes have is people consuming not enough energy or carbohydrates around the time that they're training a lot. And then what happens is you see them getting more and more fatigued as the week goes on. And then the days where they're not training, maybe over-consuming things, which is fair enough. But the point is that they haven't got it in at the right time, and that can have a big impact then on their consistency as well. And this is important because this is what I see on a daily basis in terms of how it impacts people. So when we take in our calories or our energy, we spend it on different things. We have, it's spread out amongst a variety of different things. And that could be training, it's our general health, it's our bone health, it's our immunity, it's our bloods, it's our brain function. It's all these things that we can't see and can't feel, okay? Has anybody any ideas where we think that the energy goes first in terms of maybe even some of those? Any thoughts around how that energy is distributed? Do you think a little bit goes into all of those different pots? Or do you think one's more important than the other? Any ideas there? General health, brain function, you would think, wouldn't you? Anyone else? Immunity, yeah. Where it actually goes first is into training or locomotion. And that's it's a response in terms of safety as well. Back in the day, if there was a big lion or tiger or dinosaur that ate us in the back of the room, we'd have to move. Because if we didn't, it'd eat us and none of the rest doesn't matter. So what you're doing is, you're hoping then that there's enough left over for some of those rest of things. If training is significant and if it goes up, then, and we're not consuming enough, then some of the rest of these can be impacted. And again, that depends, that's very much where the one size fits all, doesn't fit all, is because I can't tell people where that is, because herein lies the difficulty. Some people are more susceptible to some things than others. And what I would always say to athletes is, if you're getting injured all the time, you're just not that unlucky. If you're an athlete who's picking up the cold and getting sick and all, sniffles and whatever, all of the time, you're just not that unlucky. So therefore you have got to look at how you set up your day and are you putting enough juice into the tank for what you're doing. And the reality is, we talk about things like burnout and stuff like that. At the end of the day, if the body's not getting enough to sustain the basic functions, it's going to take it out of your hands and say, okay, you're injured or you're sick. What happens when you're injured and sick in terms of training? Yeah, it goes down. So therefore you can balance the books a wee bit better. So that's what happens. And in terms of the main source or main fuel source for exercise and muscles, in the vast majority of individuals, it is carbohydrate, right? Now, what we want to make sure is that we're putting in enough carbohydrate for the work and the task that's been doing. Maybe not enough, not too much of some of the carbohydrates maybe coming from food sources that maybe we wouldn't want. But again, that's where I don't focus on this good and bad, because then what we're doing is we're labeling things. We talked earlier about labeling ourselves as individuals. When, food hasn't got any morals. Doesn't. It's not clean, it's not dirty, it's not some things become really important. You know, I used to work here in Cork with rowing. Some of our rowers require 10,000 calories a day. Do you think you get that from lettuce and rocket? No, that's a big plate. If you were to eat all the fibre that's really healthy, you definitely wouldn't want to live with any rower that's consuming that. And that boat would be being powered by something else and not by them working, and that's for sure. So we've got to be really sensible and look at how we go about that in the context of what you're trying to do. Because the risk factors for that particular sport is a rib stress fracture, because those ribs are metabolically very active, and what's happening is if there's not enough fuel going into the tank, then what happens is those bones are not getting enough fuel and they're much more prone to getting injured and breaking. So these are some of the things that I see on a regular basis, and I'm not talking just about the elite levels, I'm talking about all athletes at all levels if they're not doing it right. But what we find is that there's a lot of personality traits that come out in particularly good athletes. They're perfectionist driven, they've heard this is good for me, this is bad for me, I don't need to do that, I can't do that. So again, we have to remember context is really, really important, and it's the same in terms of how you go about your business as well. So it is important. So what does those carbohydrates look like? They come from two different ones, and again, there's complex and simple. We have those labels, people would see some of those on the left, and again, for those individuals that are maybe not doing a huge amount of exercise, they're the ones we want to limit a bit more. But for those that are doing a lot of exercise, there's combinations of here, because again, I go to a scenario where, half time in a Gaelic football or a hurling match, you're hardly going to bring out a tin of baked beans and say, right, I want you to have those. But there are much better or easier options. If your guts aren't right, if you're nervous, if you're feeling sick, you take all of those contexts in as well, because that's really important. Protein, I mean, this is the one that everybody thinks is absolutely the answer to all of our problems. And yes, it is important, but it's not the fuel of choice, and it's not what we want to use. Protein is there for recovery. It's to help recover the damage that's been done by exercise, which is what you want. That's how you adapt the muscle. But what you want to do is put it in alongside carbohydrate to help recover, but it's not the fuel of choice. If you have to use fuel coming from protein, where do you think it's coming from? Do you think it's coming from what you've just eaten? Yes, you are listening in class, in PE class, that's brilliant. Yes, so what happens is that you break down the muscle that you've already worked really, really hard to try and develop. And that's why if you, again, as an athlete, kind of reflect, are there some sessions that you're particularly sore after, even though you're well into the season and you think, I shouldn't really be that sore? Have a look at it. Is that a session that you went into, you didn't have breakfast, you didn't feel properly, you didn't get a chance to have lunch and you went straight into the session after school? These are the kind of things then that the body's telling you, these subtle messages around, yeah, you've broken down a little bit of muscle, because that's having to be converted into a fuel, and our liver does that by actually taking it and breaking it down and changing it into carbohydrate, would you believe? Is that efficient? Yeah? No, it's not. So, I mean, that's as simple as that. It's not an efficient way of actually fueling what you're trying to do. So what we want to do is be able to put in the timing of protein, making sure we're getting enough in overall, and breaking it down. So, I mean, you've seen here, I don't have any nutritional supplements here. I have normal day-to-day foods that you can incorporate in very easily, and it does all the things, it ticks all the boxes. And actually, guess what? It ticks more boxes. So for example, if I was to say to you, right, take a protein shake there. All that you're getting in that protein shake is the whey protein. But if I say to you, right, have a Greek yogurt, you're getting the whey protein, you're getting a little bit of casein protein, which is absorbed in the longer run, but really importantly for you guys, particularly at the age and stage you're at, you're also getting calcium, which is going to be really important to pay into that bone pension that you need to pay into before the time you're 20, because you can't go back on that. And that's unfortunately what we're seeing, is a lot of athletes presenting really young with some bony injuries, particularly athletics, all sports actually, to be honest. And that's coming down to maybe some of the food sources that they're not getting. Eggs will give us not only their protein, but will actually give us some essential fatty acids. Some eggs are actually fortified with omega-3, which is really important for brain fuel as well. And then if we look at other things, I mean here, there's a combination meal where you've got chili con carne and a baked potato. So you've got your protein, you've got your carbohydrates, you've got your fibre, you've got all the things that you want, and you haven't distilled it in. You've ticked, or you've killed more than one bird with one stone, for sure. And the protein can come from animal or plant sources. And people say to me, I had somebody actually say to me today, it's really, really hard to get 100 grams of protein in. I actually don't think it is that difficult, because if you're mixing it up with, say for example, your chicken or your meat or your fish, but you're also getting smaller amounts of protein coming from things like porridge, coming from things like beans or peas, coming from bread, small amounts of it, coming from a load of different things. And what you're doing is you're actually trying to put all of that together. So, I mean, here we go in terms of some of our plant-based options and also our animal-based options as well, because, you know, there's no reason why we can't have a combination of both. And actually what you're doing is you're ticking a lot of the other boxes there without having to make it really, really difficult, which is important as well. And why do we need fat? It's really crucial for things like energy, particularly in endurance or ultra-endurance events. It's really important for us to protect our organs. Too much of it is not what we want, and you saw Niall present what happens if we build up too much of that due to a lack of exercise, or due to consuming fats maybe from sources that are more processed than they would be in other ways. It's important for immunity, it's important for blood flow, brain function, cardiovascular health, but we're talking about the fats that are coming from our good sources rather than the ones that are coming from processed or ultra-processed foods as well. So much do we need? We don't need a huge amount, but we certainly need enough. And unfortunately, what I see a lot of is a lot of fat phobia as well, where people are scanning labels and go, oh no, I can't have that because there's too much fat in it. And there's very little in the big scheme of things, but they're actually looking at other things and going, oh, well, I'll have lots of that, and they're mixing it up a wee bit there. Omega-3s are essential. They're particularly important in terms of our heart and brain health, and it's really important that we get them from foods or coming in. And again, things like your oily fish, nuts and seeds, and maybe things like fortified eggs is a good source there as well. So there are options around that. What I would say as well is that we've done some work around this with particularly females, where we're looking at the impacts of things like PMS and some of the impacts of that on performance and how they feel. And what we've seen actually is that omega-3 can help reduce some of those symptoms as well. So it's really important that we are getting it in there too. So you can see here our oily fish, nuts, some of the oils there, and again seeds and things like avocado are really good sources of fat there too. Fluids, really important, little and often. Again, you know, how many managers or trainers, or how many of us will go, oh no, I haven't drunk anything all day, and I'll neck a 2-litre bottle of water before I go into training. Yeah? Paying for the rest of the training session. I mean, it's in one end and out the other, so it's really important that we're doing little and often, and this is really important again for that piece around school, concentration, making sure that you're getting enough fluids in there as well. Colour is key. You know, so we're trying to eat the rainbow. Again, there are other benefits that comes with it, not only from a point of view of vitamins and minerals, but we've heard about that gut microbiome and all the bugs that live in our gut. And this is some of the things that's really going to improve that. And that then actually, would you believe, maybe has an impact on some of our physiology and some of our responses to training as well, which is what we've seen in some of the research that we've done as well. Keep it simple. Why? Because we're able to do things much easier. It's if we get into a good routine where, you know, you've got, if if you're training hard and you're not eating enough to cover the cost of that, I mean, then there's a risk of you having reduced immunity. This means then that you can more likely to pick up an infection or some kind of bug. You miss training then, so suddenly you're out for a week because you've got the cold or you've got a flu, and then your performance is going to be impacted. And what I see here, again, and it's very interesting, is this happens regularly to a lot of athletes, and then they go, well, do you know what? I need to eat less because that's going to impact my body composition, and actually we're back into square one again. So actually sometimes it's not eating enough at the right time that causes more significant impact when we come to that physical element of things, which is important as well, but we don't want to overemphasize it too much because it can lead to issues around not eating enough as well. So nearly at the end, but we're looking at recovery being your refueling, which is your carbohydrate piece, your protein to repair those muscles and to work together with carbohydrate much better, to rehydrate, and then that piece which is probably the most important is that rest and sleep piece, because that's where a lot of the work's done in terms of us being able to regrow, regenerate, and get all of those bits and pieces done as well. What do they look like? And again, I mean, milk's simple. A lot of people don't drink milk in terms of that lactose piece, but again, you could look if you're lactose intolerant to things like Greek yogurt because it tends to be lower in lactose, but you're still getting benefits there. It could be a bagel here with some, like you've got some meat options there with it. And what you have there in all of these things is carbs, protein, vitamins and minerals and fluids, especially if you're having some water there with that too. So it doesn't have to be that difficult. We're refueling. After strength training, yes, protein is important, but you want to mix that up. And again, all of these options give you options to do that. I would say that certainly with some of these options here, we just need to be mindful about our dental health and our teeth. So again, if we're consuming things that maybe have, particularly drinks, that we're just keeping an eye on washing out our mouth regularly and making sure we're looking after our teeth then as well. So dedicate time to refueling and to recover, because you will get much more out of it. You will get much more value for money out of the work that you're putting in, rather than thinking, why is it that I'm coming to training and 2 or 3 of those sessions are just not as good, I'm just not as consistent, I'm not getting the value for money out of it, that I'm not moving on, okay? And sometimes it is those basic things that make a big difference. Plan your week. There is no magic switch at 12 midnight, right? That goes, oh, there's a different day, ready to go again. And there's no overriding switch on a Sunday night that goes, there we go, we're ready to go again. We see hangovers, and I think, if you look at this here, we've got somebody here, and work back from the biggest part of your week where you have the most amount of training. And what we see for a lot of that, it could be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if you look at this here from a Saturday to Sunday, we've got somebody who's playing at 12:30, and then what happens is the following morning, they're getting up to do a mobility session. That's within 24 hours, and actually they've got a recovery walk or something like that in there, and again, that means that they've done 3 sessions in a row. And people say, yeah, but that's not really a session. But the point is, if you're putting on, and a lot of athletes, particularly at your age, where you're maybe still playing a couple of different sports or you haven't decided which one it is, suddenly we come back. We have school PE, we've got our training, we've got club, we've got whatever, and suddenly we can have 2 to 3 sessions in less than a 24-hour period. But because we've had 2 of them on one day and 1 on the other, we don't think about that because we go, that's a Monday and that's a Tuesday. And remember, Sunday leads into Monday here, and this individual is going to be training again on a Monday. So that timing and looking at your week is really, really important there as well. Again, look at your game day, look at the days before your game day, and look at the recovery and rest day afterwards, because that's going to be really important, or your race day, or whatever that is as well. So there is a little bit of work extra maybe needed. Again, some people feel very nervous leading into a competition or race or whatever, so they have to pull back a little bit, right? And this is where things that you may not consider as healthy can actually play a real role. So most of the time we'd be recommending things like Weetabix or porridge or whatever. actually fibre before a race or a competition can have a real impact on your guts. So actually it might be a better option to take a lower fibre option just before a competition or race, and you'll get better value for money out of that. So plan your meals, look at your schedule overall. This is something that's available on the Institute website. So it's actually that planning piece. College, school, part-time job, training, going from where are my pressure points in the week and looking to try and deal with that as well. And what that does then is it builds up that ability to be healthy, not to be injured all the time, have your availability, and then that brings that performance. And what we're seeing here is those world-leading basics actually probably lead to some of the marginal gains that people get as well. So, how does it support you? Fundamentals, your training enhancers, your performance multipliers, and again, recovery aids. So, there are a lot of different things in here. Some people will have them, some people might need to work on particular areas, but I will guarantee you, you will feel a lot better in some of your sessions, and you will get much better value for money out of it. Think about you as the bucket. I remember when I was in DCU, Noel McCafferty asked me to see a runner once, right? Because the runner had a really low iron level, and the coach wanted an iron infusion. And I said, why? We haven't worked out where they're losing the iron from. They want an iron infusion. And I said, well, I mean, you have to fill the hole in your bucket, because in another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, their iron level is going to still be low. So there's no point, again, sticky plaster situation, shouldn't be given infusions anyway for risk in terms of that, and at elite level, you can't be given that willy-nilly anyway. But again, they weren't willing to try and establish why it was that their iron levels was low, and that actually would have given them a bigger performance gain in the longer term. So, big picture, and again, remember, and this is the social media piece, right? These carrots, 2 lads here, 2 girls, this carrot on the right-hand side to your right looks great, doesn't it? A real TikTok carrot. Real Instagram tart, absolutely, for the gram there, right? The other lad looks shocking. Wouldn't put it anywhere near Instagram in a country mile. Better basics. The underlying bit that you can't see, you can't feel, right? And the problem is, in terms of injury and sickness, when you can see it and you feel it, you have a problem. And that's what we see on a lot of our athletes as well, and that's what we want to try and avoid. So thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Sharon. That really was an eye-opener. It's interesting how sports science has come on over the decades. It's astonishing, actually. A little while ago, Niall was showing us an image of one of his favourite soccer players, and that was a guy called George Best. If you haven't seen him in video and so on, you really should. Around the same time, there was another Irish footballer, and he was called Johnny Giles. Did you ever hear of him? He used to work on TV, analysing games. Well, I worked with him for about 15 years. We'd head across, he lived in England, in Birmingham, and I would go across on the day before Premier League match and got to know him pretty well, and most engaging character. And he told me about some of the preparations that they had in his playing day. Now, admittedly, it's quite a long time ago. He was playing for Leeds United, and they were the top team in England at that stage, rivaling Liverpool. But on the day of a game, if you can believe this, on the day of a game, everything is structured where you're a footballer. You're told when to get up, you're told when to go to bed, you're told how much sleep you need. And on the day of the game, at about 12 o'clock, they were all given a steak dinner. So you were getting a T-bone steak with lashings of onions on it, complete with chips. And that you were meant to consume at 12 o'clock with the kick-off 3 hours later. I mean, it is just amazing. And thankfully, sports science has come on and on and on, and we know an awful lot more. There was so much ignorance at that particular stage, unfortunately. Well, from nutrition and physiology, the next subject that we want you to consider, ladies and gentlemen, is psychology. Our next speaker is an expert in this field. He's an accredited sport psychology consultant with over 15 years experience working with a variety of high-performance athletes and players. His aim is to get people and teams and organizations to become the best varieties of themselves, to be the best you can be. That's the target. He's worked with lots and lots of sports bodies here in Ireland, in the US, New Zealand, Australia, in fact, all over the world. And he's also had an association, a long association with Cork GAA. Will you please welcome high-performance psychologist, it's Kevin Clancy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the token Cork presenter. On the gig tonight, we got Niall and Sharon down from the country, so we needed to get somebody local, so that's why I arrived here. As Jar mentioned, Kevin Clancy is my name, and I'm a sport performance psychologist by training. And I grew up only a couple of miles from here in Turner's Cross, and as a kid, I was obsessed with sport. Probably like a lot of the kids in the room here today. I loved playing sport, watching sport, reading about sport, talking about sport, and most of all, being out there and actually playing sport. And I played a variety of sports: soccer, football, hurling, tennis, all kinds of different sports. And I love sport. I got to the age of about 14 or 15. And for the first time, sport became not just about me enjoying myself or having fun with my friends. Sport became about winning. And I realized that I didn't have the mental skills to be able to deal with that. I was the type of player who could be very, very good at a training session, but would struggle when it came to a match situation or it came to a performance situation. I knew I was every bit as good as the guy who was next to me in the dressing room. He was able to get the best out of himself in a manner that I wasn't. And in games, I'd become fixated in advance on the player I was going to be marking or the team we were going to be coming up against. And I'd make a mistake in the game and I'd fixate on that mistake, and then of course I'd make more and more mistakes. And what I've realized from working in this space, as was mentioned, for over 15 years, is that everybody experiences those things to some extent or another. And I've been fortunate enough to work with All-Ireland winners, rugby internationals, Olympic medalists, and all these different people. And they all experience similar things. And I will guarantee you there are people sitting in the room here tonight who are maybe experiencing some of those things now. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is, I want to touch on a little bit of maybe what's happening there, and what are the things we can think about in terms of maybe shaping your mindset or influencing your mindset so that you are actually getting the best out of yourself. And there's three areas I'm going to speak to you about this evening. I'm going to pick up, actually, Sharon touched on this a little bit about how our brain works. Because it is actually really important that we have some fundamental understanding of how the brain works, how our operating system works, essentially. Because that can really, really help us in terms of getting the best out of ourselves. I'm also going to touch on a little bit about the drivers are some of the things that we can think about from that perspective? And the final thing I'm going to leave you with is some strategies in order to maximize performance. Now, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about your brain, so I'm actually going to invite you to put your brain to work at the very beginning here. So what's going to happen is, I'm going to put a slide up on the screen here, so hopefully everyone in the room can see the screens. There's going to be a sentence on that slide. All I want you to do is I want you to identify the number of F's. Okay? So that's F for France, the number of F's that are in this slide. Okay? When you're happy that you have a number, you don't need to consult with anyone else, when you're happy that you have your number, and I ask you to please stand to your feet. Okay? So everybody with me? Okay? So the number of F's that are in this sentence, here we go. We've got a pretty slow crowd tonight. Okay, I think that is everyone? Okay. So can I please invite you to take a seat if you identified one F in that sentence, please. One F. Anybody identify two F's? I think there's two F's in the sentence. What about three F's? Okay. You can take a seat if you thought there was three F's. Four F's. Anybody pick out four F's? Five F's. Anybody pick out more than six F's? Would you take a seat, please? Okay, so for all the remaining people standing, could we get a round of applause, please? So if you take a look at the slide and try to count the number of F's that are here, I will guarantee you, because I was this person, I will guarantee you there's still people sitting there who cannot identify the six F's in the sentence. So I'll point them out, just so we're all on the same page. I'll point out where the F's are. So finished and files on the top line. On the second line we've got two ofs, of years, of scientific, and on the final line we've got another of. So the first time I saw this, I read it in a book. I was on my own, and I said there was three F's there. There had to have only been three F's there. I turned the page and couldn't believe that there was six F's there. I had to read down through and make sure that I saw all the F's there. Now, this is, and it says that in any given sample of the population, up to 95% of people will not be able to identify six F's in this sentence. And there's a number of theories, not exactly sure what's happening here. There's a number of theories. One is that that F sound is in finished and files and scientific. It's a different sound than of, so that maybe we don't pay attention to it in some way. Another theory is that we actually read that word of so often that we actually just filter it out. It's almost like our brain skips a beat with it and just doesn't even pay attention and it's there. But to me, this gives us a fantastic insight into how our brain, or how our minds work. In that we have a human brain that can conceive of, like Niall pointed out earlier, conceive of sending somebody to the moon. And yet 95% of us can't pick out six F's in this sentence. So there's clearly blind spots with the system that we're operating with. And I want to give you a very high-level overview of the brain and how the brain works, because it's extremely important when it comes to us thinking about performance. So I'm going to show a very short video here. This is from an Australian organization called Centis, and it gives a really nice introduction into the brain and how the brain works.
brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So, if we think about the brain and building on what the video has said here, for a long time, up to relatively recently, probably the late 1980s or early 1990s, it was believed that once you got to a particular age, somewhere in your early to mid-20s, it was thought that that was it. Your brain was fully developed and it never changed after that. We now know that that's not the case. That depending on how we interact with the world around us, depending on the way that we think, the way that we feel about particular things, or the actions that we take, we can actually reshape our brain. That's why it's referred to as neuroplasticity, because it is plastic. So the adage about you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that's actually not true when it comes to looking at our brain. But that doesn't mean that it's easy to teach an old dog new tricks. And our brain, and Sharon touched on this earlier, our brain takes up roughly about 2% of our body's mass, and yet it's responsible for roughly about 20% of the body's energy. And it's designed, if you want to use that term, it's designed for very, very simple environments. It's not designed for the kind of complexity that we experience in the world today. It does an incredible job at adapting itself, but really what our brain and what we know about how our brain works is that our brain is really about survival, and it's about preservation of the species as much as possible. So it does an amazing job at adapting, but it struggles with the complexity, and that presents us with some challenges. And I'm going to give you a very, very high-level overview or language to think about in terms of the brain and how this relates to sport, but also how it relates to our lives more generally. So I'm going to talk to you about three ideas or three areas of the brain. And the first is what we would refer to as the fast brain. So your fast brain is like your automatic brain, or it's almost like your subconscious. Very, very similar to that. This is where all of our skills, our experiences, our memories, our practices, our ways of doing things, our habits are stored in our fast brain. And our brain is incredibly efficient. So it loves operating from the fast brain, because if we've got a way of doing something that's easy, there's actually a physical pathway there, and the brain will revert back to that. And we use our fast brain for anything and everything as we go throughout our days. Right? The action of walking, so those of us who are privileged enough to be able to walk, like you think about all of the different things that are involved in just taking a step. Think about what your hip has to do, your knee has to do, what the rest of your body has to do, and yet we do it automatically once we've learned it. Really, really simple. It's a fast brain activity. So And just to actually give you an example of this, could everybody fold your arms, please? And then unfold them. And then fold them again. And unfold them. And instead fold them the opposite way around. How does that feel? Feels a little bit weird, feels a little bit uncomfortable. That's because for something as simple as folding our arms, there's a neural pathway there. And when we move away from it, you can kind of hear it in the room, a little bit of a kind of a groan. That's our brain saying, why are we doing it in a different way? We have to devote more energy to thinking about that. So we need to keep this in mind when it comes to sport. You play a sport predominantly from your fast brain. You're out there playing hurling, you're not thinking about, I need to throw the ball up, I need to bring the hurley back, I need to hit it, you're just doing it. It's just automatic. So it's really, really important from a sporting perspective is, what's in your fast brain? What are the habits that are in there? What are the beliefs that are in there? What's the whole identity that you've created around yourself around that particular sport? Because it will have an impact when it comes to you going out and actually playing. Second area of the brain is what we refer to as the slow brain. And this is like the conscious. And this is actually associated with a physical part of the brain. It's an area called the prefrontal cortex, thought to be the part of the brain that developed most recently in evolution. It's really the part that separates us as humans from other animals. Now, our slow brain is incredible, but it's very, very limited in terms of what it can do at any given point in time. Best way of thinking about how your slow brain works is if you were to walk into a pitch black dark room and all you had was a spotlight on the top of your head, think about what you'd be able to see or focus on in that. You'd only be able to focus on whatever the spotlight was on. So you wouldn't be able to put part of the spotlight on something over here and another part of the spotlight on something over there. So the idea of us being able to multitask, or certainly us being able to consciously multitask, is a myth. And I'll invite you to demonstrate this also, okay? So could everybody take your right foot off the ground, please? And if you rotate it around to the right-hand side, so in the clockwise direction. And then at the same time, if you draw the number 6 in the air with your hand, please. And notice what starts to happen. So I obviously can't see everybody in the room here, but I'll take a guess at what starts to happen here. Everything starts to go wrong there. Okay, so your foot starts to go in the opposite direction. Some people end up drawing a circle. Some people end up drawing a 6 backwards. In very, very simple terms, what's happening there is you're actually trying to split out the spotlight and everything starts to go wrong there as a consequence. And a very simple example of when that starts to happen in sport, I mentioned earlier, this was something that I experienced. Somebody makes a mistake, and the mistake is still in their mind. It's very, very difficult then to try and go on and actually execute another task or execute another action, because it almost acts as interference. So, where our slow brain becomes really, really important is that it is the gateway for change. If we want to change anything in our fast brain, if we want to do anything differently, in the video there they talk about developing a new pathway. It starts with our slow brain. It starts with that spotlight. It starts with being very, very deliberate about something. Or about whatever it is that we are trying to change or trying to develop. It's also the place where we get very, very deliberate about our mental preparation. So what thoughts are we having about our particular sport? How are we dealing with those thoughts? A lot of that can happen in the slow brain. What images are we creating about our sport, about what's going to happen in a game or in a race or in a performance situation? All of those things are things that can happen in the slow brain and can impact the fast brain and how we perform. And then the final area to talk to you about in terms of the brain is what I refer to as the chin. And the chin, again, is associated with an area of the brain. It's the amygdala. It's thought to be one of the areas of the brain that developed initially in evolution. Our chimp is our fight-flight freeze response. Its main driver or concern is keeping us safe. Right? Really, really useful for us, particularly useful for our ancestors thousands and thousands of years ago, because they didn't know when they went around the next corner whether there was going to be a tiger that was going to want to eat them. So we need that response. Challenge that we have in this day and age is that our chimp rears up at any point where we perceive a threat, even if it's not a physical threat, even if it's a psychological threat to us, or even if it's a threat to our social status, the chimp will take over. The problem when the chimp takes over is that it takes over the whole system. And the slow brain will tend to go offline, which is why, excuse me, when you're extremely stressed, you'll notice that you're not very, very rational, because this slow brain, its capacity to be able to do anything, which is the rational part of our brain, is not available to us. So really when it comes to thinking about our brain, it's important to understand this operating system, that if we want to change something, that happens through our slow brain. And if we want to manage our chimp, actually a lot of that happens through our slow brain also. So it's really thinking about how we're going to use that and how we're going to use the operating system to get the best out of ourselves. Excuse me. So, I'm going to just touch on that knowledge of the brain and how we actually start to apply that and how we actually start to think about using this information. If we think about what drives us as human beings, and this is an idea that I've developed from research into the area, from looking at research or evidence in the area, from my own experiences in working with people over a long period of time, and from my own personal experiences. When we have what I would describe as our basic needs, or Maslow back in the 1960s spoke about his hierarchy of needs, when we have our basic needs met of food, shelter, safety, and some kind of financial piece that's going to help us to be able to meet those needs. After that, there are really three key drivers that push people and that motivate people, and that, as Niall mentioned earlier, that light a fire under people. And these are really, really important for you to think about, particularly if you're a teenager and you're thinking about where you want to go with your life, or you're thinking about what are the next things you want to do, or you're even just reflecting on what are the things that you enjoy the most. The first of these things is purpose. Why do you do something? Right? We are, evolutionary psychology would suggest to us that we are wired to connect to something greater than ourselves. This again probably goes back to our ancestors thousands of years ago, that you wouldn't have survived if you were out on your own. You needed the tribe. You needed to feel like you were contributing or helping something, or contributing towards a cause, towards a tribe. So this becomes really, really important in terms of purpose. And what I would say to the young people in the room is, think about what are the things that actually bring you to life. And it's funny, Sharon and I were speaking about this just before the session this evening, that we took around, and we can see it from Niall's story as well, we took a roundabout way to get to where we are today. In my leaving cert, I wanted to study psychology. I didn't get the chance to study psychology, so I went to UCC, and I studied the two subjects that interested me the most in school. I studied English and history. And I was interested in them, but I wouldn't say that they lit me up in any way. And in my first summer at university, I spent that time in Edinburgh, and I was in a bookshop one day, and I still remember this, and I picked up a book called Sven-Goran Eriksson on football. Sven, the manager who sadly passed away in the last couple of weeks. And the book was co-written with a guy called Willy Raylaw, who was a Norwegian sports psychologist. I didn't even know that sports psychology existed as a discipline. And there and then, there was a fire in me that I wanted to go and I wanted to become a sports psychologist. this can become a little bit of a kind of a typical thing to say, that you need to be able to grow, you need to be able to progress. As humans, we almost have that need to feel like we're progressing towards something. But growth requires you to be uncomfortable. That's the nature. It requires you to be vulnerable. It requires you to step outside of your comfort zone. So again, think about in your life, think about in your sport, are you doing that enough? Are you stepping outside of your comfort zone? Are you working in the areas that actually you just really, really enjoy, you like doing, which is important too, but also are you stepping into those areas that they're difficult, you're not that strong in, but that you want to get better at? And the final one, and this is a very fancy term, autonomy. And this is really important for teenagers as well, because you're getting to that stage in your life where you are now more and more going to be in charge of your life. Many of you are going to be going on and doing the leaving cert, and after that you're going to be going on to third level or going out into the working world or doing an apprenticeship or whatever it is that you want to do. As much as possible, starting to think about how can you take more responsibility or control over your life at this stage, because that's a skill that you're going to need as you develop further. Sharon showed the example even of the week, a nutrition plan. Thinking about that. Can you sit down on a Sunday evening and actually plan out your week and think about all the different things that you need to do and actually start to take more responsibility? That's not up to your parents to do that, but that actually you're starting to do that. Because again, that's a fundamental driver for people. Do a lot of work with organizations, particularly around the area of well-being and mental health and performance in the workplace. And two of the biggest factors that impact upon people's mental health in the workplace. One is your relationship with your direct leader. And the second one is how much autonomy or control you feel you have over your own work. And it doesn't matter how much people are getting paid, if they don't feel like they have autonomy or control over what they're doing, that actually can have an extremely negative impact upon their mental health. Before I jump into the three strategies, I'm actually going to just give you 60 seconds just to turn to the person beside you. And if you don't know the person beside you, you can introduce yourself. And actually use this as just a bit of a reflection point. To think about, do you have any questions? Is there anything that's jumped out at you so far from what Niall has said, from what Sharon has said, from what I've said? So I'll give you 60 seconds to do that, please, with the person beside you before we go to the last. I want to leave you then with three strategies to just think about and to reflect on in terms of your own mindset, your own psychology, or in terms of how you can influence the mindset or psychology of other people. And the first is, and it's interesting, again, going back to Niall's talk earlier, one thing that I've come to realize from working with high performers or reading about high performance or just being really passionate and interested in this area is that what's actually far more important and what you tend to see people who really excel in different areas is they tend to focus more on who they want to be rather than what they want to achieve. And there's a very, very subtle difference 2011, Carter he'd been World Player of the Year. The All Blacks he was playing with, they bombed out of the World Cup in 2007 in the quarter-final stage. They'd been the top team in the world since all the way back to 1987 when they won the first World Cup, but they hadn't managed to win another World Cup since. 2011, the World Cup was on at home in New Zealand, and they were the overwhelming favourites to win that World Cup. Carter was their poster boy, their main player, World Rugby Player of the Year at the time. And very early in the tournament, he got injured. And he's talking here about how he psychologically dealt with that injury and how he framed it up. And we'll have a little bit of a listen into what he has to say.
So 2011, a Rugby World Cup at home, I was 28, it was at the peak of my career, and then we went off to the final training of the week. I kicked the ball and I just fell to the ground. We went to the hospital, did an MRI scan, and I asked her, is my World Cup over? And she was like, yes. And I went into my hotel room, my wife came in, teammates came in, coaches came in, and there was just nothing to say. And it was probably one of the hardest moments of my career. But then I reminded myself of, well, actually, remember that first test match you played for the All Blacks? What was your vision? That's what I was to be an All Black great. Well, what does an All Black great do in a situation like that? Well, he puts the team first. So all of a sudden I was like, right, I've got to walk out of this change room. I've got to help the new players that are coming and playing my position. I have to reset goals. So I re-signed a new contract for another 4 years to try and play in another World Cup in 2015. So through this horrible injury, I learned some really important tools to help me deal with setbacks. One of them was, it's okay to grieve. Right, so I always give myself a 24-hour period and then go, right, close that, change my mindset, positivity, reset my goals, work out where I want to go to, what I need to do, what's the process to help me walk towards my vision.
To add a little bit more context to this, Carter made his debut for the All Blacks back in 2004. And he said, up to that point, his whole goal in life was to play for the All Blacks. And he played against Italy in his debut. He was walking off the pitch and he thought, I've done it now. And he said, I need to think about something different. If I just focus on, if that's the end point, then what's going to happen after this? So he then made it more about who he wanted to be. And he decided that he wanted to be an All Black grade. But think about the difference in response between, if he identified himself completely around, I have to win the World Cup for New Zealand, or with New Zealand, versus, I want to be an All Black grade. So one of the things around him being an All Black grade was that was more within his control. Okay? He could do specific things that were going to help him to try to achieve that goal. Winning a World Cup was outside of his control. Even if he did everything possible, there was no guarantees that he was going to win a World Cup. And look at the difference in response. If his whole thing was around, I want to win a World Cup, and he suffers that injury, his whole psychological process collapses. Versus, what does an All Black grade do in this situation? So it's strongly encouraging. Think about it, and I spoke about it earlier with some of the Gaelic footballers. Think about who do you want to be? Do you want to be a healthy person? Do you want to be high performer? Do you want to be a good student? Whatever it is. And a very important point, and there's a good book which I'm sure many of you have read called Atomic Habits. And in that book, it's something that stayed with me. It's the thing that's actually stayed with me most from that book. He talks about your behaviors are constantly a vote for the type of person that you want to be. So on a daily basis, Dan Carter was voting for being an All Black grade. But James Steer, the writer of that book, makes a really important point. He says that to win a vote, you don't need 100% of the votes. You just need to get more than half of it. So even if you're deciding that you want to be a healthier person, you want to be a better student, or whatever it is, it's as much as possible having the behaviors around those things, but it's not about perfection. So that's the that set up in a way that's actually going to help you to get the best out of yourself? So, as mentioned earlier about mobile phones, the research around mobile phones, particularly first thing in the morning, if the first thing you do is you reach for your phone and you check your messages and you check your emails, which, look, let's be honest, folks, most of us do it, like that leaves a residue, a psychological residue, and it does have an impact in terms of your performance, in terms of the rest of your day. And so it's really thinking about your environment and how you set up your environment. And I'll leave you with this last idea, which is strategy number 3. And it's about focus. And if I was to boil down what often separates some of the best people in various different fields from others, or if I was to boil down what is the absolute essence of psychology when it comes to performance, I would say that it's about focus. It's about your ability to zone that spotlight in on what you need to zone that spotlight in on. And when your brain brings you away and starts thinking about what you're going to have for your dinner tonight or whatever else is going on, to be able to bring that back again and back again and back again. That's a skill or a muscle that we've lost in recent years. Some of it comes down to technology, a lot of it comes down to the technology that we're dealing with. Now, I touched on earlier as well, the skills of the future are really about those interpersonal skills, and at their very core is this idea of focus. If I got everybody to do one quick exercise, Paddy, are you going to kill me? No? Okay. So folks, what I'm going to invite you to do is I'm actually going to invite you to put your focus to the test a little bit. Okay? So I'm going to ask you to get nice and comfortable in your chair. So nice straight back, 2 feet on the ground. And for 60 seconds, I'm just going to invite you to pay attention to one of your senses. Okay? So one of your senses. That could be something that you see in the room. It could be a sound or sounds. It could be you just zone in on your body and scan through your body. It could even be a smell or taste in your mouth. Okay? So I'm going to invite you to think about, to focus in on one sense for 60 seconds. Okay? We all ready? Off you go. I'm going to guess, I'm not going to ask anyone in the audience here, but I'm going to guess, having run similar exercises with many, many people over many years now, that there've been mixed responses to that. So some people would have found that incredibly challenging, incredibly difficult to do, because if you're just focusing on something that you can see, all of a sudden you can hear something. Or maybe there's a feeling that comes in your body that distracts you. But the essential piece with that of actually just building that muscle and bringing your attention back again and again, it's actually, if we think about it from a sporting perspective, you think about any sport that's out there, what it is a lot of the time is it's exactly what you did there. It's trying to keep your attention to something, and your attention's going to be dragged away, and then refocusing again, and then it gets dragged away again, and then bringing it back again. Mindfulness and mindfulness meditation and mindfulness practice, I firmly believe, and it is becoming more and more popular, it is going to be the thing that will separate people, not just in sport, but in the working world into the future. Because that ability to be able to bring our attention back, and that ability to work on that and practice that, I think is going to become as relevant, or as, trying to think of the word, it's going to become as widespread as going to the gym is in today's world. So, I'm going to leave you with that. I'm just going to say a big, big thank you to everyone. What are we doing now? Kind of going to, oh, sorry, pass it back to Ger. I'm going to pass it back to Ger for the next stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Kevin, for that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am very conscious of the time element here. Due to circumstances outside our control, we weren't able to start on time, as we had hoped. This is your night, you know that. You've come here to be the best you possibly can be, to quote one of our earlier speakers. To help you in that regard, we've had three outstandingly, brilliantly talented speakers here, and I know that you're going to want to ask some questions. Now, I don't want you to be shy about that, so Wendy here will collect any little question you might wish to put on paper if you don't want to speak the question yourself. Failing that, we'll bring a microphone around. You can ask your question, whatever it is, whether it's about the physiology or the psychology or the nutrition. Our speakers are going to be here. We'll take a short break. I suggest, Paddy, we make it about a 7-minute break at this stage. Is that okay? So we're back here at just after 9:30, ready to go again. Thank you very much indeed. Wendy has got a question or two. One so far.
What is a good food or drink supplement for half-time during a soccer match at all grassroots? I mean, I think what you do, it depends on how hard you're working in the first half. I mean, I used to give an example, I think it was a couple of Monaghan players. If you're on the bench and you're eating everything at the half-time, that's not what you want. But I mean, I would keep it simple there for that. I would make sure that I go into that match well fueled up. And actually, for something like that, where the intensity is maybe not as high, you could probably get away with maybe a combination of water and maybe, some dilute squash with water in it as well. So it's a bit of both. What I would say is that if it's a really hot day, then you may need to look at focusing on a bit more carbohydrate, because you burn more carbohydrates like a badly serviced engine and using more oil. So that's why you see people cramping in the heat more than you would do on a day where it's not as warm. So I think the environment plays a big role in that as well. So you might have water on a cooler day, but actually you might have something in it on a day where it's a lot warmer. But you need to practice that as well, because people don't like running around with a lot of fluids. And I mean, it could be adding a couple of jelly babies to that as well if you've had a particularly tough session as well. It doesn't need to be a huge amount, but it needs to be practiced as well.
That's great. Question here. How do I deal with pre-match nerves? Anybody want to
terms of dealing with the nerves, it is understanding what's the routine, what are the things that you need to do in the couple of hours, and particularly leading to the performance, that are going to help you to manage those nerves as much as possible, and then go and perform after that.
One here for Niall. How do I help a team bond and work together?
A million ways to skin a cat. I mean, again, it depends on the team, the level that you're playing at. I think culture is probably the most important thing. You create a culture. I was over the DCU Sigerson team for 18 years, and the culture was that if you were a member of the panel and you were playing, you kept your position in the team unless you played poorly and then someone else came in. That meant playing in the Sigerson final where Michael Murphy didn't start. He was a sub. He got surgery, and Owen O'Gara was in. Owen O'Gara was playing instead of him. So Owen O'Gara played in the final. Michael Murphy was a sub. You create that culture, and then players want to be part of that. Because people will say at the beginning of the year, well, every player is going to be treated the same. You don't treat every player the same. Your players are going to be treated differently. But when you know there's a culture of fairness, I think that's what really helps a team to bond. You can go out for weekends, but they're acute. I'm much more interested in creating a culture where you don't have to go out for the weekend. When you have to go out for the weekend, it tells you that there's something missing in your squad, that you have to take them away together to bond. Now, it could be that, particularly in amateur sports, where players don't see enough of each other, or they come to training and then they go home and have no time to socialise. That could be slightly different. But yeah, going on social occasions, it doesn't necessarily have to involve the sport at all. Just being together, that can be transformative.
Football or hurling teams or rugby teams who go away for bonding weekends, Sharon, and they're drinking pints. Nutritionally, that's not terribly hectic, I imagine.
I mean, again, it's it's what are your aims and objectives? What do you want to do for yourself? I mean, you've got players that you talked about the steak. I mean, I thought it might have been smoking and pints that we're going to have. The reality is that, I mean, a lot of teams are working at a level which the training is so high, it's so intense. I mean, control the controllables. You put in something that's going to make the body have to work a lot harder. You run the risk of potentially either a direct injury because you do something stupid that night when you're out, or you're potentially at risk of dehydration where you can pull muscle or whatever. I mean, there are a number of different ways of doing that. Or, I mean, does that feed into part of the culture piece as well? That there's lots of things going on there as well. I would never, I don't come out and say, oh, well, don't go drinking, but there is risks associated with that as well. boxers would say, how come you tell them that they can eat whatever they want, but I'm not allowed? And I say, it's not about that, it's about what you're trying to do.
Here's one again for you, Sharon. You're busy. Can you fuel the evening before? If a teenager, for instance, hasn't been eating breakfast?
Absolutely. I mean, see, evening before is your first breakfast. And again, that there's no switch at 12 midnight that's telling you, people, that's just a timeline we put in our own system. I mean, if you're going out to do a swim, let's say at 5 o'clock in the morning, swimmers, you know, getting up at 4 when you can maybe get up a wee bit. First breakfast is the night before. You might have something in the car on the way to the swim, and then you have your breakfast afterwards. And again, if you're doing a run, possibly the last thing you want is a big full feeling in your stomach. So therefore, it's easier to do it the night before.
This is one for Kevin. How would you have the 14-year-old who used to get nervous and not perform? Again, back to nerves. A 14-year-old
who used to get nervous.
Yeah, that's what I've got here.
Oh, sorry. How would I have me? Oh, sorry. Go back. So I think education is a big part. Firstly, I think like if I was thinking back to when I was that age, like if somebody actually just like demonstrated to me, or even like John mentioned a few minutes ago, everybody gets nervous, everybody has these doubts, everybody has these fears. I think that would be a starting point, and then you would be looking at different strategies that you could use, or different tools that you could use. So one is, and I mentioned the last question as well, like having a routine. So by its nature, when you go out and you play a match or you run a race, you don't know what's going to happen, so there's a lot of uncertainty there, and that's where a lot of the nerves come from. So what you want to do is control as much as you possibly can control, and that could be, you know, anything from breathing exercises, it could be things you watch on your phone prior to going out and performing. It could be how you tie it in with your physical warm-up, like what does the mental warm-up look like in terms of your self-talk. So there's a variety of different things that you can do there. But I would say education would be the starting point, and then starting to look at some of those strategies or tools.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin, for that. We've got a question down there. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Most teams practice at night probably because it's the only time they can practice, so it's in the evening. It's probably in an ideal world not the ideal time to be doing your practicing, but that's what the lifestyle is leading us to. What are the best strategies relative to, you know, sleep being such an important part of overall performance, and the lack of it can lead to huge losses in performance relative to refueling, you know, in that whole field of trying to militate against the fact that you are practicing at night because it's the only time you can practice. But now you want to get the best out of it, and there are surely strategies to try and, you know, be the best that we can be with that in mind.
Anybody wish to follow up on that?
Well, I think you raise a really important issue, because our games, our national games, are primarily non-professional rather than semi-professional soccer and then rugby. And it's an issue I have, particularly in the GAA at the moment. I sit on a committee at the moment looking at the amateur status in the GAA and setting guidelines in relation to the number of times a team can train and all of those fixtures, etc., etc. And the point I keep making at every meeting is that we keep talking about our gimmick, our hurlers and footballers being training as elite athletes. And they do, they train the very same as soccer players and rugby players. The big difference between them and the professional players is recovery. And you heard already, the body adapts. Every time you train, you break down the body. And the body says, well, the next time you take me out, I'm going to make sure it doesn't disturb me as much, so I'm going to adapt, and I'm going to increase the size of my muscles, the number of capillaries. So if you don't get the appropriate recovery, it really devalues the training. And I think that's my big problem, is that the GAA managers want to continue to train at an elite level, but they're not getting the benefits out of all of it. Sitting in a car and traveling for 3 hours, you know, and getting home at 2 o'clock in the morning is not what I would call recovery. Manchester City, the players in these English professional teams, after training, they go into a and I'll come back to sleep in a moment, but before that, I just think we need to reduce the volume of training that our athletes are doing. They're no fitter than they were 15 years ago, aerobically. They're much, much bigger and stronger. And our games are endurance type games, and we've just lost sight of that. It's just these big, big, grown, massive men playing a sport. Even this year, at Ireland semi-final, I saw 2 players go down with cramp in normal time. And I'm just saying, why all the training? You can't last for 60 minutes running at an average 118 minutes.
It's probably on low carb diets as well.
Probably. So I think the sleep, you're right, and that sleep plays into that. Because you're not getting sleep is such an important, particularly for the brain. That's when the brain really finds itself, is during sleep. And the rest of the organs, systems in the body that are affected with training. So if you're not getting appropriate sleep, but as part of the overall recovery strategy, particularly you make for amateur sports, it's a big, big issue. And I think it's something that really has to be confronted. And also the travelling of players, particularly college players early in the season, leaving college at 4 o'clock and coming back at 2 in the morning. They might as well not have gone to a training session as far as I'm concerned.
Anybody want to add to that?
I mean, like, just on some basic strategies, I would try and front load my biggest meal of the day earlier in the day so that it's available for you if you can. You know, I know that's not going to happen with everybody, but rather than again eat dinner at night just because I always do it, drive that earlier in the day so that you have the fuel available to you. You're not then having to eat a big feed late at night, which then may impact your sleep as well. And then work on 2 smaller meals either side of that training, so that actually you're setting yourself up for the training. And also maybe, and what we have as well, and we'll come back to that, is they do pitch-based sessions maybe on a Tuesday, and then they're in the gym on Wednesday morning at 6 o'clock, and you're going, I mean, really? You know, where is that adaptation going to happen? It's not. And I mean, yes, you can't feel that because it's a big cost. It takes a lot of time. They're time poor, they're at college, they're at work, they're in a car. How do you do all these things, you know, in that period of time, and then they wonder why they get injured? You go.
Is there another question over here? Go ahead.
So I mean, it's very clear down the middle. Firstly, I just wanted to thank you for a very knowledgeable and insightful conference here tonight. My own question is, I suppose it might apply to yourself, Kevin, a bit more, but it's open to the floor. When dealing with, let's say, a student, for example, hypothetical, a student who might be overweight, might have a difficult background, upbringing perhaps, but how would you develop their confidence and, I suppose, their self-esteem, and how do you build them up from such an unstable upbringing and basically having no foundations at all?
So that's a really difficult question. There's no point in saying otherwise. I think the first thing you need to do in a situation like that is that you need to get that student the right support and the right help. And I sometimes think coaches at times and teachers sometimes feel like that they need to be counsellors, or that they need to be the ones who are going to solve particular problems. That shouldn't be the case. The role for a teacher or for a student should be, a teacher or a coach should be to understand more with the person, try and build a bit of a relationship with them. If it's something that's outside of your skill set, if it's something that somebody's had a really difficult background, or they're coming with a trauma or things like that, you really need to encourage them as much as possible to get some professional help around that. Because being blunt about it, like I can give you all of these different strategies and things you can lose, or things you can use in terms of building somebody's belief or somebody's confidence, but they're going to be band-aid solutions in situations like that. Just really trying to get them the access to as much support as they can.
Do we have another question? Can I ask also in that case? It's about athletes and players who have failed in their objective in 1 year. How do you go about convincing them that the following year they can get it right and they can be successful? Now, for instance, you weren't involved with Louth in 2023. Mickey Hart will be the manager. They played Dublin in the Leinster final. They didn't look confident in themselves that they would beat Dublin. This year, you were there. Ger Brennan was the manager. And they looked different in the sense that I got the feeling they weren't they did so, who knows, they could have won, and they came quite close. How do you work out the difference between those 2 years?
Again, I think it comes to context. First of all, to acknowledge the enormous work that I did in 2 years. I call it the Nickel Dwyer factor. And I was saying to this earlier, once you have a player believing in themselves, it makes it a hell of a lot easier for a manager to come in. I think with the advantage that Ger had coming in this year is that they had played in the final last year. None of those players had ever played, in a Leinster final. So the whole razzmatazz around the week the previous year didn't happen because they were seen it done. And I think Ger, being an All-Ireland winner himself, being there, done it, being part of the Dublin team, James McCarthy, being there, done it. So here's guys that were able to tell them, who played in All-Ireland finals, played in provincial finals. I think that belief, but I think it primarily came back to the fact that they had played the previous year. They knew themselves, and they knew they'd let themselves down. They let their families down, their clubs down. No one was more infuriated than the players, and they didn't want to repeat performance. I think tactically, I think Ger is a wonderful person. He's a great people manager, and I think he probably embraced a larger segment of the players and got them to believe in themselves. And that question you asked earlier, there was a sense of culture. We're in this together.
Again, same question. Any observations from a psychological point of view?
Yeah, I'd agree with Niall there, I think. And Lowe are actually a great case study of this, like touching earlier with growth and progress. Like they were making progress all the time. Like I said, they got to the Leinster final the year before. I don't think you can underestimate that impact that actually understanding what the week is like and everything around that can have also. But I think that step-by-step approach, like that's how you build. He was constant. That's not the most sexy thing to say, but that's how it happens. It's step by step by step.
Essentially.
I should say after one of the Leinster finals, that this is what the Leinster final means to Dublin. Unfortunately, I remember we were walking out of Crook Park, we were sitting on the bus, and I was sitting beside Cian Sullivan, and someone said, "Where's the cup?" We couldn't find it. But into the dressing room, we were sitting in a box of bananas. Any other county in Ireland, you know what I mean? So it's not that's a reflection of where we are in Leinster.
That used to be the way with the Kilkenny hurlers as well on Leinster final day. They put up into the back of the boot of a car, and that was the end of that. Just on the psychology and how it has developed over the years. Back around 1987, Billy Morgan became the manager of Cork footballers, and they lost that year to Meath. The following year, 88, they drew. They should have won, but they drew, and then they lost the replay. I'm not quite sure if it was at that stage, but Billy Morgan, very innovatively, brought in a sports psychologist at about that point. George Tracy. And people in Cork said, "What is Billy at?" But Billy was very forward-thinking, and he observed all strands of sport. And guess what happened in 1989? Cork won the All-Ireland. They won male. First All-Ireland win for 16 years. And in 1990, they managed to overcome another barrier, which was beating Meath. Again, Billy Morgan ticked that one off, 2 in a row. So the value of sports psychology at that point was obvious to him. It's become more and more and more part and parcel of Gaelic football and other sports as well nowadays.
Yeah, it absolutely has. Even, look, I had the privilege of being involved in 2010 when Cork won the All-Ireland. Football has been part of the backroom team then, and like we sometimes joke, Caroline Curran and Kieran Shannon or other psychologists around the
didn't get the memo about ties being optional, but there you go. Good night.